Hi everyone, welcome to Gender Spectrum's online panel discussion. Today's program is called Choosing the Right College, Advice from Young Adults on Finding a School or Path that is Supportive of Your Gender. My name is Jenna Hackman. I am a project coordinator at Gender Spectrum. My pronouns are she and they, and I'm here today with some amazing young adults who are going to be kind of carrying this conversation. I've been really looking forward to this program. I feel like this is kind of a broad topic, but it's a topic that I think is really important for us to kind of talk about a little bit. So we have some kind of general questions as well as some more specific questions that folks submitted prior to the program. So we're going to try and get to kind of a little bit of both. So why don't we just start with introductions and then we will jump into questions. So if each of you want to share your name, pronoun, where you live, and then if there's anything else that you want to share around like your identity or things that you're interested in doing, anything you feel is important for the audience to know. Anyone want to start?
I can start. Hi everyone, my name's Eden and I'm 18 years old. I use she, her pronouns. I am from Los Angeles, but I'm currently studying in Galesburg, Illinois. Anything else? I have never ever had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Yes. I could go next. My name's Kristen. I use they, them pronouns. I live in the Bay Area, so in Alameda. And I make zines around queerness and gender.
Go. Hey, my name is Jared. What's up? I'm from Oakland, California, but now I study at Salt Lake City at Westminster College. One of the things that I do currently right now is that I am a program coordinator for one of the it's called Queer Compass on my campus, and it's just about building, the LGBTQ plus community on our campus. And I think that's mad cool. So, yeah.
Okay, my name is Henry. Any pronouns work for me. I'm 19. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. And currently, I am the LGBT organizer for the ACLU of Tennessee. So.
Howdy, y'all. My name is Aiden Castellanos. Pronouns are he, him, his, they, them, their, whichever is easiest for y'all. I'm currently 20 now, and I'm from the Bay Area, like right by San Bernardino, so like right by San Francisco. But now I live in Pennsylvania, specifically Philly. Yeah, and I don't know, I guess, and probably something I do now is just like I currently work with immigration justice, work with like Pennsylvania Student Power Network, which is like a nice rad like student power group within Pennsylvania, that's statewide, as well as immigration justice with Foodless, which is Philadelphia specific, for queer and trans Latinx immigrants. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for the introductions. Like we have a lot of really smart and capable young adults in this space. So let's start off with just kind of like a broad question, which is sort of what path did you choose after high school and why did you choose that path? Feel free to jump in, whoever wants to start.
After high school, during high school, my plan was to go to school for music because I'm a singer, and so that's what I decided to do. But then when I was in high school, I had like two different types of like, I guess, lives. One was being an artist, one was also being like involved in activism and social justice and things like that. And so when I went to college, I expected to go to a conservatory, which is just a school of just music. But then I ended up at a liberal arts college. And so then I'm now able to do both. So currently right now I'm a vocal performance major and a justice studies minor. And my path right now is music, but then also like with a, I guess like social justice aspect, which is making classical music, which is the genre that I sing, more accessible for people of color and those of lower incomes. So yeah, that's my path right now.
All right. So pretty much after high school, I knew that I wanted to go to university, but I wasn't exactly sure like whether or not I'd be able to afford like college at all. But I was really lucky with being able to get like a really nice scholarship to the University of Pennsylvania. And so like I currently study there now. And like the reason why I ended up like choosing that school was like a mixture of like financial aid, but also like it had like one of the friendliest like queer and trans like ratings within like was it campuspride.org or was it campuspride.com. I mean like just like really good like support networks in terms of like being able to help with providing like resources and like medical care and everything. So it was like able to like help me support with like transitioning since I didn't necessarily have that access beforehand. And also just like ended up having like a really good psychology program, which is what I wanted to pursue. But I mean, like I switched majors now and I'm in urban studies. And I think that's also just because of like my pull towards activism and organizing that I've been doing for so long, since like high school. So it's just something that I ended up like keeping in there. Yeah, so that's where I am now.
I could go next. So after high school, my plan was to go to school for music, but I ended up not being able to afford the private college. So I actually ended up at community college. And I was glad that that happened because I changed my major a handful of times, like at least 5 times. And then I actually ended up being able to not only afford college by going to community college, but I actually was able to get grants so I could pay for my books and everything and felt like I was in a really good, stable place financially for school. So it worked out for the best that way. Through trial and error, it took a lot to get through the financial aid process as a first-generation college student. But I have a twin, and so we kind of did it together. So I have like a unusual way that I went about it, and I went about it with someone close to me. But I ended up going to Berkeley. I transferred, and I was able to graduate in 2015. And since then, I've just been trying to see what I want to do with my life, and it's kind of changed. It's always changing, but I think like I've always been centering around activism. So I'm from Southern California, and when I was in the community college, I did a lot of activism down there, and then I moved to the Bay Area, where it's also a great place to be doing activism. But recently, I've been doing more advocacy for biking and transportation in cities. Yeah.
So I'm currently at the liberal arts college, and that's the path I chose right after high school. I just knew I wanted to get into a 4-year school. My sister went the community college route, and I just felt like that wasn't for me. So financially, it's like it's at a place where it's like, oh, I can do this, I can manage, but also could it be better? Yes. I'm currently majoring in economics with a double minor in gender and women's studies and Middle Eastern studies. So I knew exactly what I wanted, which is why I was able to choose what I did choose. So I don't feel like I'm necessarily, it's not the best term to use, but wasting money just to figure stuff out.
So I took a gap year, which is not necessarily like what my parents wanted or my grandparents wanted or anyone wanted. Like, I didn't necessarily think I was going to take a gap year until like the month before I was supposed to head out to college. So that was exciting. But I took a gap year for a couple of reasons. One, I accepted a really good job with a really good company. So I really like my job at the ACLU, and it takes a lot of time, so I don't really have time to go to college. Two, I wanted to be able to get gender affirming surgery before I went off to college, especially if I was going to move far away, because I was planning to move out to Denver. So yeah. And three, because I had a really close family death, and there was no one really able to take care of like my grandmother through that time, because she had to deal with a lot through that. And so I decided that I would stay just so that she didn't have to like lose two people so close together, you know what I mean? So that's why I decided to take a year off. Oh no.
Awesome. So I think this kind of is a good kind of lead into our next question, which some of you spoke a little bit about. Did your gender impact your decision at all? Maybe it did, maybe it didn't, maybe it was like in the middle. I'm just kind of curious if any of you can speak to that.
So yeah, I think it was mostly just like I wanted to find a school that I knew. Like I think it started mostly with like when I wanted to like I really wanted to go to college. Like my family are immigrants from like Mexico, so like I felt like just kind of like responsibility of like needing to go to college because that's why they came here to make sure that I got like a good education. So like this was something I wanted to do, but I was also afraid. I mean, like I'm trans and like I've had like experiences with violence before, so I was like worried about like what could possibly happen. So I chose like like when I was applying to colleges, I think I was only looking at schools that were like gender, like again like trans friendly, and also like schools that could afford like to be able to give me like enough financial aid so I can make it. But I think like also just like housing options, which is what ends up coming up like as a thing like in college, and like UPenn had like dorms where it was like, you know, kind of like you'd still live with other folks. There was gender neutral housing, and like you would be able to have like your own space, and it was still like covered with my financial aid, so it was like something that was accessible for me. And I'm like really grateful for having that, but I also know that that's like not the case in a lot of other situations. I don't think like if I had been able to go like to San Francisco State or like to other schools where I didn't have that option, like it would have been there. But definitely like a lot of fear and safety was still like on my mind, like as I was just applying for different things.
I think when I went to community college, I was going to a school I could commute to by bus pretty easily. I was just crossing a county line, so I was living at home, and that was fine. And I actually didn't start. It was a long process for me, gender-wise, and like figuring out that like I'm non-binary and all that stuff. So it didn't really come into play until I was applying for transferring. So I was looking at a lot of Cal State schools and UCs because those had the best financial aid packages for me. And so a lot of the UCs like UCLA and Berkeley and schools like this had gender neutral housing. So that was definitely something that was a goal of mine, and I applied for it. But I ended up getting into a school, UC Berkeley, where housing is already an issue, and it's really tough to get into housing, especially when I was 22 years old. So I was older, and I ended up in a freshman dorm on an all women's floor. So my housing situation got a bit muddled, and I eventually got moved for safety from a room. So I kind of went through a little bit of a struggle the first week, but I ended up actually in my own room. But I can say that for those that did get housed in gender neutral housing, it was a good experience for them, and I know those folks. And there's also like housing focused for queer folks, and there's co-ops off campus that have different themes. So there's a lot of options, but I will say that like certain schools don't have enough gender neutral housing to house everyone. So there are cases where safety can be an issue, at least in my case. Yeah.
Wait, hold up. Okay, good. So when making my decision to go to college, figuring out my gender situation, which right now I'm still figuring it out, but at the time, I was very worried. I was very worried because when I was in high school, I wasn't necessarily like fully myself at that time. I hadn't figured it out. Even the parts that I figured out, I was still like not sure on actually like performing them. And so what I was trying to do, what my goal was that I was thinking, okay, first I want to go to big cities because usually if it's a big city, that means there's going to be a large like LGBTQ scene. I was not like, what I thought about was that like, if my college is like, if the college that I go to isn't going to support me in that way, then there will be resources outside in the city that can support me in that way. And so like that was how I made my decisions. And then ultimately end up being like more of a money problem rather than a gender problem when it came down to making choices. And so when it came to making my choice to come down here, I thought about my safety more, I think, like racial wise. I think that the way that I perform my gender now is more, it is not as, the first word that comes to mind right now is not as like safe as it used to be. Right now, you see me on camera, it's not that bad. But but back then I wasn't thinking about that. And so when I came here, when I made the decision to come here, my gender, I thought that I had to like put it aside for a quick second and make the decision of like education. But luckily right now I can say that I'm gender wise, I'm like very happy and expressing myself in that way. I'm on a very like safe campus. And so that's really, really good. So yeah.
So I think I'm the only person from outside of California. So yeah, gender played a huge role in how I was raised and like my college process. So I grew up in a really conservative town in Tennessee. I was the first transgender student like in my county. And so given that experience, and it was just awful for me in high school, I really needed to take a break from school because I suffered a lot my senior year just trying to juggle like gender identity issues, being bullied, and school and everything like that. So yeah, gender played a huge role for me, and like just how I experienced school and why I wasn't like ready to get back into it.
I think kind of this next question speaks a little bit to Henry, what you're talking about. I'm curious kind of how you all found community sort of in these new settings that you were in. Was it easy to find community? Was it difficult? And kind of how did you navigate that? Because I think you do kind of go, it's like if you're coming from high school, you're in these very sort of structured settings, and then you have kind of this abrupt shift. And I think that can be really positive, and that can also be really hard. So I'm just curious if anyone can speak to kind of how that was for you or how it currently is for you.
So when coming to Utah, which is where my school is, my first, like the biggest concern that I had was racially, how am I going to find people who are like me, people of color, how am I going to find those people? And then once it came to that, like if I find those people, how am I going to find, you know, the queer folks who are like me, who I can fit in with? And so when I come to the school, and my first maybe 2 weeks or so, I just didn't, like I hadn't found anybody that I really connected with. And the way that I found community just happened to be through chance. It really happened to be chance. Now that I'm more involved in my college and how things work, I can recognize how I was able to, if I hadn't met a certain someone who's already connected socially, how I was able to figure that out myself. But how I found my community now, which is really what is it? It is a really like a Black queer femme group of people, which is just so amazing. Oh, they're so awesome. And they're so social justice activist folks, but are also just really just smart and just really down to earth. Anyway, so I found that community through just finding one person who I vibed with, and they knew other folks. But now, if I was speaking to anybody else who came to my campus or went to another different campus, I can talk about my campus. But is where I met other folks like me, or where we normally hang out, is where we are really invited, which was the Diversity and Inclusion Center at my school. And so that's where all the POCs hang out. That's where all the, well, I can't say all of them, but that's where some of the LGBTQ folks, you know, come and hang. I also work there. So that maybe they're there for me. I don't know. But but yeah, that's where I found my community. I'm good.
So when I was living in my small Tennessee town that I grew up in my entire life, I had a really hard time finding community, just because it's, yeah, like I said, it's really conservative. So when I started coming out, I lost a lot of friends. But then when I moved into like the city of Nashville, I was able to like find more community. So I started going to like this community space for young LGBTQ people, and I found a lot of friends there. And also beginning my job at the ACLU with like all of these really affirming and wonderful people gave me a sense of community. Even if they're like years and years older than I am, it still gave me that sense of community with people that were like actually affirming me for once, instead of like hating me and kicking me out of their church. So yeah.
I definitely have to say that I have struggled with the specific community that I'm looking for at college. I mean, there are communities of people of color, and yes, there are communities of queer folks. but I am yet to find a QTPOC community, which is like queer and trans people of color. I'm yet to find that, and what I'm looking for. It took me like a full term to find one person who I could connect with who happened to be a queer person of color. And now I just like don't ever let go of him. We always hang out because we connect and we vibe. So I think, my school just recently turned into a majority minority school. And that's still a work in progress. But I see potential in it because when you look at stuff like the student newspaper and student-run organizations and what they do, I think that kind of gives you a sense of where people are at. So when I look at the newspaper of my school, I feel like those communities are out there. So if community is an important aspect of someone's college decision, I think they should definitely look into student resources like student newspapers, student blogs, and stuff like that.
Just similar experience enough with like Eden, specifically regarding like finding community in terms of like there's like definitely like spaces for like folks of color and like for Latinx folks on campus, and like definitely spaces for like non-cis folks on campus, but being able to find like something where it was like having that as like an intersection for me. Oh, sorry. But yeah, wait, should I repeat myself? Or should I? Is it good? Okay.
I just want to make sure that everyone can hear you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
But yeah, just being able to try to find a space that could actually be able to like both of those identities could kind of exist like together. It's just like really difficult. I've been able to find like a few personal connections with folks that like wouldn't necessarily join like either like the QPOC or like the Pen on Cis. So like it was just like there was just like a weird thing regarding like identity like in these spaces, and I didn't necessarily feel like I could really have that like on campus. It definitely got a lot better like once I started moving off campus. I feel like, and that's why I ended up like joining so many more organizations like within Philadelphia and within Pennsylvania as a whole. Just because I couldn't necessarily find what I wanted like within my school. And so like that's kind of like what's been able to at least like help me in like kind of affirming like the work that I do, and like also just like my own personal identity. So just because like I didn't realize how much more conscious I would be of like my like intersecting identities as being like a first gen low income like queer and trans person of color, before I like actually was in that space. But yeah, so just what ended up happening.
So when I went to community college, the first thing I did was find the GSA on campus. And I hadn't even come out to myself as queer. So that was something I really struggled with. So I joined the group, and it was not what I was looking for at all. And I really struggled with that, to try to like be comfortable with myself and then try to find a community, but it wasn't the community I felt I needed to support me in what I was going through. So I was fortunate enough to go to a community college in the same city as a Cal State. So I actually joined the Queer Straight Alliance at Cal State Fullerton. And like I mentioned before, I had a twin, so we kind of did this together. And that was where I found all the people I needed. They were community focused, they were into activism. I will say, I think it goes along with the climate of the school and the resources that you have. Like people have mentioned earlier, the Cal State had a lot of, not a lot, but had funding for queer organizations. And there was a a place to meet where all these queer groups could meet and talk with one another, all this stuff. At my community college, there wasn't that. And that's just because, when it comes down to state funding for community colleges, it's really tough to get funding. The campus climate at the community college was really tough for queer folks. And this was in 2010. So a lot of people are struggling to survive on campus. So to be out and to be open about your identity was to put yourself in danger on campus. So it was really tough. So I looked to the community. And then when I transferred to Berkeley, I was 22, so I was a bit more comfortable with myself and my gender and queerness, all that. So I was able to find organizations on campus because there are student centers on campus. But I think for me, I've always been looking outside of school for community. And in the Bay Area, I've been organizing and finding really good support networks through zines and zine making. And that's something that I started in Southern California, but the Bay Area is just a really big hub for zines. And that's where I've been able to find a community of people that are just really great and they're doing radical work. And was actually the reason I was able to fully accept being not only queer and non-binary, but also being disabled. So the list was growing and I needed to find the community, and I found that in zines. So that was really great. Yeah.
Awesome. So I want to jump to a few questions that were submitted from folks prior to this program. So we have one question from a parent, but I think it's about a teen. And their question is, what is the most important thing to consider if you plan to start to transition with hormones 4 months prior to entering as a freshman and living in the dorms? Would it be better to take a gap year after you've had a chance to adjust to transitioning? I don't know if anyone wants to speak specifically to that question or if you have thoughts around kind of the general theme of that question. Yeah, that's from a parent.
So yeah, like as I mentioned before, I wasn't able to like start hormones until I got to Penn. I think there was just like it was mostly just stuff regarding like I didn't understand like what my health insurance would be able to cover. Like I was on the Affordable Care Act, and also I wasn't sure how comfortable my mom would be with me wanting to do like with me wanting to do just hormone replacement therapy. So I ended up finally having like some more agency when I got to college, and I was able to start doing it. And I think like there was just like a weird thing I had with like how much I would talk about like being trans. And I think like I had like a lot of comfortability with it, more so just because I was so used to like having to constantly come out. There was some stuff going on like with my high school, and like everyone knew that I was trans, and like also there was just like instances where I'd like feel really scared, so I'd go over and I'd like cut myself just because like I was so afraid of my safety, and I didn't want to put myself in like dangerous situations before I got into them. So I think like just doing like I that's where I kind of like I would just constantly out myself like as I was doing like hormone therapy. But I mean like when I got to like 10, first off, like they thought I was like 14 years old because I just looked like it just seemed like a little boy, I guess. I don't know, just like funny stuff there. But I ended up like kind of ended up just more so doing it like during there, and I think it was like really a lot more harder than I thought. But if this is like starting like 4 months before going to school, I might say it's like a little bit easier. I didn't necessarily like adjust to hormones completely until like 2 or 3 months, actually, where, you know, the whole thing with just like voice changing and like weird, like just up and down, like bouncy energy levels, like just everything that came with like hormones, sex drive, all that stuff. Like it didn't necessarily, like, I didn't fully adjust to it until like around that period. So I like, that's like, but that's also like my personal experience. And the thing is, it's like hormones doesn't work for everyone like that. So I don't necessarily know like how this is going to like impact someone else, but I know that that was like my personal feelings on it, and it like was enough where I was able to like kind of be able to work through it at like while doing school. But definitely also like different for everyone. That's just my personal experience with it.
So I was fortunate enough to be able to start testosterone my junior year of high school, and actually my 2 years on testosterone is on Thursday. That's exciting. Yay. But I guess I also like adjusted to the amount of changes that were happening to my body. It took me more like 6 months though to like fully adjust. But things to consider if you are like transitioning before school, I would think like what your school will cover, because a lot of schools will cover like HRT and gender affirming surgeries in their insurance plans. I think I used to be like a college mentor, so I know a little bit about it. And two, like I would call res life, like the residence life of the college you plan on attending, and seeing how they feel about it. If they have like a plan in place for trans housing, then that's probably like a good place to go. But if they don't, then work that out with them if you really want to go there, or if they have a program that really interests you. I think the unfortunate thing about like transitioning in college is that most of the colleges that are the most affirming are also the hardest to get into. So they have the lowest acceptance rates. And it's awful because like my grades weren't perfect by any means. Like I didn't get into UPenn. So but those are the things that I considered. And I think taking a gap year was like the best for me and my medical transition. But most colleges like lean pretty liberally and can like affirm trans people for the most part. So I wouldn't be too worried about it.
Thank you for sharing. So looking back kind of on where you're at now versus like kind of where you were at when you were maybe in high school, like thinking about making these decisions, has anything come up that's been like surprising to you, or something that you weren't expecting that you wished you would have known when you were maybe like that senior in high school, trying to map out sort of what path you were going to choose? I see a lot of thinking happening.
I think that personally, I wish I would have known more about the lack of stability in the current like political climate. Sorry, I had to bring it up. But I think I wish I would have known like how hard it would have been for me to study abroad, how difficult it was just going to be to go about my day-to-day life in college, you know, going to classes, doing this, doing that, but also, you know, resisting and surviving every single day against all odds. So I think I did definitely underestimate how hard it was going to be as a low-income, first-gen, queer, you know, person of color, to be in college so far away from home in a very, very, in a very white and like not necessarily conservative, but not as progressive as I'm used to town. And like, I wish I would have known all these things. I wish I would have known how difficult it was going to be for me. Not that it would have changed my decision, but I would have been definitely more ready. I would have brought more tea.
I guess when, like, looking back to when I was a senior in high school, I would have wished there had been more talk or prep about how to afford school. No one in my family went to college, so I had no idea what a Cal Grant was. I had no idea that if you're at a community college, you can apply for a BOG fee waiver that pays for your units. I had to do the research, and I was lucky enough to have the ability to research and like learn all this stuff. And everything I learned, I tried to pass on to everyone I knew on campus. And I guess at community college, I sort of had community because I still had my family. But when I transferred to Berkeley, I wish I would have known what it's like to leave a support network. And I guess, like, looking back at my high school self, I wish I could have had some sort of way to prep for like mental health. I think like when you leave and then you lose your network and you're trying to find it, but at the same time, like, you're trying to take 20 units of classes and you're trying to just like get on day to day, but then also you have all these questions about gender and like all this stuff, and it just seems overwhelming. And I think that for a lot of schools, mental health resources are not there. So I think it's important to, and I think mental health and financial aid, all this stuff is like all intertwined, of course. So I think it's like really, yeah, I think I wish I would have had time, I guess, to like prep for this sort of stuff. Yeah.
I think all of the things that I didn't know my senior year of high school, I learned, like being able to take a year off and being able to put more time into my college process because I took a year off, I was able to look more into like scholarships and like just kind of what college climate I wanted to be in. And so I'm not saying like you have to take a year off to find yourself and find out what college is best for you. But like it took me a little longer than it took most people to learn like exactly what I needed from a college. And so yeah, everything I needed to know my senior year of high school I learned like through my gap year. So
Okay, I have one question that was submitted by a team that's kind of specific. And they asked, when and how do you talk to your professors about name and pronoun changes? I read on Tumblr that most people send emails to professors before class starts to avoid confusion, but I'd love to hear about people's actual experiences doing this, especially for people who use they, them pronouns. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to this question or has experience with anything related to this question.
So some schools are, at least I know recently, Berkeley has a way in the student gateway so that you can actually change your pronouns on like your student role or whatever it is. This happened after I graduated, so I'm not sure like what the process is, but there are some schools that are trying to make sure that you can put this somewhere already, because there are professors that don't ask these, or like it's not something you can do. So, I mean, I was in 2 programs at Berkeley. I was in the Gender Women's Studies department. So this was something that was asked quite often. It was And then I was in the anthropology department, so it kind of wasn't asked there in most cases. So I found myself, when I was at Berkeley, trying to be okay with the fact that like some professors just were never going to ask pronouns and were going to misgender me, which like is not fun at all. But I have a lot of friends who've sent emails, and emails do work in certain cases, but there's other cases where just some departments that just, they're scary. I don't know. But I know that some schools are really trying to make it easier for you to put it on your student gateway. That way when they print the student roll, you can have that ability, so then the professor doesn't get that choice over you.
I think this is a really specific question, but like in a good way. During my art class, we all got asked our pronouns, but when it came to certain classes, I had to be, or like other people had to be the people who brought it up. So if you're going around the classroom introducing yourself, especially if you're at the beginning of like the line, just go ahead and say your pronouns. And everybody, if the student body is supportive of queer rights and like anything that's not cishet, they will follow along and they will say that. Some professors who are on their path to being more inclusive will say stuff like, if your pronouns are something other than what I would assume, let me know, which is terrible because it puts you on the spot. It just creates this hostile environment that you may not want to be a part of. So I would say, yeah, emailing before the class works, but also just initiating that conversation of, or if you don't want to do that, if someone's speaking and you want to hop off of what they said, say, hey, I'm not sure, what are your pronouns, so that I can refer to what you said properly. And that'll also initiate a classroom discussion and conversation about that.
I like that idea of like saying your pronouns in a line. I've definitely done that in some work settings, and sometimes if you're at the front of the line, then people just start doing it, and it's like a great way to just like kind of set that norm from the beginning. All right, so another question we have from a teen on the Gender Spectrum Lounge is, what was your level around disclosure? Did this change over time, and how did you decide who and when you disclosed to?
So yeah, I talked a little bit about this already, but pretty much there was just like a lot of trauma that I faced with like not necessarily like talking about my gender identity, like more things before like talking with certain people. So I just gotten like a lot of my anxiety like really acted up with this, and so I just started doing it like more and more often. But even then, like Penn isn't necessarily like, even though like we have like our campus climate that's like, or a campus climate that wants to say it, or at least like kind of like policies that are there in order to like protect like trans students, it doesn't necessarily reflect on the student body. So I'd still had like a few threats, even like around campus like stuff, and I think it's something where I have people close to me that like I feel safe enough to be able to like talk to them, be able to like say like, hey, like something that like is happening, and be able to receive aid if needed. But also it's just like there's just been a lot of weird feelings that have always come up for like me just disclosing like who I am, just because there's like it's like, oh, I'm not safe if I like, if they end up like finding out later and then they get angry at me, or like I'm not safe if I guess I might as well just like say it now, like regardless if they're angry at me, because at least like it won't feel like I lied to them or something like that. Like there's just like, again, like a lot of anxiety that I've like felt with this, and like it's definitely like affected my mental health. But just like to what extent I can really talk about this with people, but it's just like gotten to like the point where I need to say it like right away. And like if something comes up, like I guess I feel like just more safe, like being in control in the situation, because it's like at least like I won't have a connection with them, like, you know, I won't have foreign connection, and then like it will break off later in the future. It's just gone now. But again, this is all with just like safeties, fear, all that jazz. So it's pretty much like the way that I've kind of, that I'm just currently am now, with just like how I talk to folks about like trains. So,
I guess when I was in community college, I didn't disclose any of my gender stuff to anyone. And that was for safety. I know it's not always the case, but I just feel like I don't owe it to anyone to have to disclose, but I also know that like I do have some privilege in being able to like pass in certain situations and environments in a way to like be safe. It was different when I was in Southern California, and I found myself having to not disclose stuff, even about being queer, just in order to kind of survive on a day-to-day basis. When I got to Berkeley, it was a different climate. People were more accepting, and it was actually really nerve-wracking being able to disclose. I was like, how do I do this? Like, I know this person will accept me fully, but like, what? And I mean, that wasn't always the case. I definitely like had moments, even in Berkeley, but within like certain groups where I knew I would be supported and people would be there. Yeah, I guess it's the way I've dealt with it is on a case-by-case basis, depending on my safety. And it took me a while to be able to tell myself I don't owe it to anyone. And so that took a while to learn, yeah.
Thanks for sharing. So we have just a few minutes left, and I want to kind of open up the space for you all. If there's anything you want to share that maybe wasn't asked, like in a specific question, if there's like anything on your mind that you're feeling like you really want to share with people who are going to be watching this. Yeah, because I know sometimes certain questions don't always speak to what you actually want to share. And so just want to open it up for you all. If there is any kind of like last closing things you want to share with the group.
I would like to share some tips on how to find accepting colleges. I think one of the, I'm sorry, there's background noise. I think one of the most important things to do, like I've mentioned, is to look into the student body and what the student organizations are doing. If you go into the school newspaper website and you look up stuff like, you know, keywords like trans rights, or you know, stuff like that, you can definitely get an idea and form an idea of what the school is about and what the students are about. You can also go on the school website and look up any mission statements about recent executive orders, or you know, stuff like that that have come up, or stuff on DACA, or like even affordable care. Like schools do those things, and they put out those statements to show support for their students. You know, looking into sanctuary campuses could be something that you may do if that's what you're looking for. But also keeping in mind that when it comes to like some legal issues, putting a name on certain things makes you more of a target. So, for example, if you are, let's say, if you are associated with a GSA, then you're more likely to be a target of the violence that is directed towards that GSA, right? So that's an example of why you should also look out for those labels. Not only look for them and want to be a part of them, but also keep them in mind in regards to your own safety. You can also contact students from the school that you're thinking of applying to or going to, and ask them if they have gotten any emails, because I know my school, my administration sends us emails about bathroom rights and, classroom rights and trigger warnings and stuff like that. Some schools have completely dismissed trigger warnings as necessary or needed. So stuff like that. Just look into what is going on currently in that school.
Does anyone else want to share anything? I don't want to cut folks off, but I can't tell. Thank you for those tips, though, Eden. I think those are awesome. Yeah, Henry.
I think there's like a huge stigma around taking a year off of school, and there's a lot of fear surrounding it. Like, what if I forget everything I learned in high school? Like, there's just a lot of stigma around taking a year off, but it really was the best option for me personally, and I'm going to say don't be afraid to do it. Because a lot of people are not in the financial situation where they can go to college right away. A lot of people need to work like I do. And a lot of people just don't know what they want to do yet. And so why would you go to college if you don't know what you want to do? Right? So like, I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I didn't go to college because I didn't want to spend money doing something that I would end up changing completely, probably. So I'm going to taking a year off was the greatest option for me. It's a totally valid option. And if you're afraid of like academic struggles, a lot of schools have like free tutoring. So like the school that I'm going to in the fall has free tutoring, and that's an option. And B, you can always like, there are a lot of websites that have free online courses from colleges that you can definitely look into and take just to like keep your mind working, So yeah, just don't be afraid to do what you need to do.
Okay, well, I think, yeah, go for it, Kristen.
Oh, I was just going to say, I know that like there's a lot of ideas around community college and going to community college, but I actually think it was the best choice. I think it gave me a lot of room to grow and to explore. I was actually able to take so many classes that I wouldn't be able to take if I was in a four-year. I know four-year plans are great for a lot of people, but I think if you're uncertain, I learned a lot and I grew a lot at community college. It gave me the space I needed to grow. And I went in not knowing what to expect. And I had some of the best classes and some of the best teachers, and the most wonderful people I met were at community college. And I think that they are so important. And I just want to like reaffirm the fact that community college is a great path, and it doesn't mean that you're stuck like so many people believe. Yeah.
Aiden, Jared, you good? Okay, well, I think that's an awesome kind of note to wrap up on. I just want to thank you all so much for not only like dedicating your time to this conversation, but sharing some like personal experiences and personal information. I think that this is going to be a really awesome program for a lot of folks. So thank you for just taking the time to have this conversation with all of us. For folks watching, we'd love to hear your responses to this program, your feedback on this program, if maybe certain things that were shared really resonated with you. A great way to kind of continue this is in the Gender Spectrum Lounge. We have a group in there called Trans in College, and there's over 50 folks in there who are having conversations really around what we talked about today, from kind of gap year programs to pronouns in classrooms with professors to finding the right housing. So if you're really wanting to continue this conversation, it's a really big topic, and I think we could talk about it for much longer than we did tonight. I'd really encourage you to join the Gender Spectrum Lounge and check out that group. Yeah, and I hope that this program was beneficial to you all watching, and we look forward to having more conversations about this in the future. Bye.